September 3rd, 2022. Greenwood, Mississippi. By dawn, the most extravagant wedding this small southern town had ever seen had collapsed into a nightmare. The celebration had lasted 14 hours. The marriage itself, only 47 minutes. At 3:27 a.m., the bride lay dead in her blood-stained gown. The groom sat on the carpet, trembling, his hands torn and bruised, muttering the same words over and over. "She betrayed me. She betrayed me." Hotel staff whispered it was a crime of passion. Neighbors insisted it was a sudden rage. But detectives would soon discover something far more chilling. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't an accident. It was a plan. A plan carefully set in motion months before vows were exchanged, long before Emily Richardson walked down that aisle. To the outside world, Jason Coleman was the perfect son, the perfect groom, the man every mother wanted for her daughter. But Jason carried a secret obsession. And Emily, beautiful, graceful, with her quiet smile, was not the woman everyone believed her to be. Between them sat a web of lies, debts, family deals, and a past affair that refused to stay buried. And when the truth finally broke open inside that honeymoon suite, it didn't just destroy a marriage. It exposed two families, an entire community, and a chilling question that still divides America. Was this murder the act of a man pushed beyond his limits, or the execution of a woman trapped in a game she never agreed to play? If you're hearing this and you feel even the slightest chill in your chest, don't just sit there. Hit subscribe right now. Because if you walk away, you're no different from the guests who raised their glasses that night, pretending everything was perfect while Emily's screams went unanswered. She can't speak for herself anymore, but you can choose whether her story lives or dies here. And if you decide not to, then step into the comments and explain why you think her life isn't worth remembering. So stay. Because once you hear the full story of Jason and Emily's wedding night, you'll never look at love, loyalty, or marriage the same way again. Jason Coleman. At 29, his name carried weight in Greenwood, Mississippi, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and reputations were currency. To the outside world, Jason was the model son, the shining example of what discipline and ambition could create. He had grown up in a modest house on Pinecrest Drive, the only child of Victor and Lorraine Coleman, a hardworking family who prided themselves on their Christian values and their ability to endure tough times. Neighbors remembered Jason as the boy who mowed their lawns in the summer and shoveled driveways in the winter, always polite, always flashing the smile that people in town came to call his signature. But behind that smile was something harder to see, something sharper, less forgiving. Even as a teenager, Jason had an edge. He excelled in sports, basketball, and football. But what stood out wasn't just his skill, it was his reaction to failure. He started a contracting company in his mid-20s, building a reputation as a reliable young entrepreneur in a town desperate for development. He was the man local politicians invited to ribbon cuttings, the one who sponsored little league teams, the one who parents held up to their sons and daughters as the definition of ambition fulfilled. To neighbors, he was handsome, driven, polite, everything you'd want in a son-in-law. But beneath that sheen, Jason carried an obsession most people never saw. He didn't simply want loyalty, he demanded it. Ex-girlfriends would later tell investigators about his controlling streak. One remembered how Jason once scrolled through her phone without asking, dismissing her outrage by saying, "If you don't have anything to hide, why should it matter?" Another recalled how Jason would show up unannounced at her apartment, not out of romance, but out of suspicion, as if verifying her whereabouts was his right. When those relationships ended, Jason painted himself as the victim, the one betrayed, the one disrespected. His world was black and white. Loyalty was sacred, and betrayal was worse than death. So when Jason met Emily Richardson, he saw more than a bride. He saw a test. Emily was 26, beloved in Greenwood for her warmth, her faith, and her devotion to her students. She taught third grade at the local elementary school, and parents described her as patient, encouraging, and kind-hearted. At church, she sang in the choir, her voice blending softly into hymns that filled the sanctuary with peace. To anyone who met her, Emily seemed like the kind of woman who had done everything right, graceful, educated, faithful, a role model for younger girls in the community. But Emily carried a past that she guarded closely, a part of her life that she had locked away and never spoken of outside of whispered prayers. During her junior year of college, Emily had fallen into an affair with a professor, Dr. Lionel Barrett. He was in his 40s, married, respected, and admired in academic circles. To Emily, at 19, he was a mentor at first, someone who saw her potential and encouraged her intellect. But admiration blurred into late-night study sessions, which turned into dinners, which turned into something more. For nearly 2 years, Emily and Barrett exchanged emails filled with confessions and longing, met in his office behind locked doors, and built a relationship that was equal parts intoxicating and destructive. Emily knew it was wrong, knew she was compromising her values, but she also knew how deeply entangled she had become. When she finally ended it, it was not with anger, but with shame. She cut off contact, graduated, and returned home to Greenwood, determined to bury that chapter of her life. For years, she succeeded. She threw herself into teaching, into faith, into family. When she met Jason, she believed she had finally found redemption. He was steady, admired, ambitious, the kind of man her parents had always hoped she would marry. But 3 weeks before the wedding, her carefully constructed life began to crack. The first message arrived in her inbox late one night. It was from an anonymous account, with no subject line. Attached were screenshots, old emails between her and Barrett, ones she thought she had long deleted. Emily froze, her chest tightening as she scrolled through the words she had written years before, words that now threatened to destroy everything. A week later, another message arrived, this time with grainy photographs. Her walking out of Barrett's office, her head low, his hand brushing her shoulder. The final message was the most terrifying of all. It read simply, asterisk, tell him the truth, or I will. Asterisk. Emily didn't tell her parents. She didn't tell her bridesmaids. She convinced herself it was Barrett, bitter that she had moved on, bitter that she had found happiness without him. She prayed it would stop. She pressed forward with the wedding. What she never imagined was that Jason already knew. He had seen every email, every photo, every piece of evidence. What Emily thought was a desperate attempt to ruin her future was, in truth, a setup. Jason hadn't stumbled upon her secret. He had orchestrated the entire trap, building his anger, preparing his confrontation, and waiting for the moment she would be most vulnerable, on their wedding night. Both families, meanwhile, were blind to the storm gathering. The Richardsons, once one of Greenwood's proudest families, were drowning in debt. Harold Richardson, Emily's father, had chased real estate dreams during the housing boom, buying properties he couldn't sustain when the market collapsed. Their home, once a symbol of stability, was mortgaged to the edge. Harold owed money not only to banks, but to business partners and old friends, debts he could never hope to repay on his teaching salary. Emily's marriage wasn't just about love in Harold's eyes. It was about restoring the family's name, salvaging dignity, and perhaps securing a lifeline through the Coleman family's rising influence. The Colemans had their own desperation. Victor Coleman's contracting business had seen better days. Competition was fierce, and rising costs had left the company bleeding. Victor's only hope was a series of lucrative city contracts that required political connections he didn't have. Harold, however, did. He sat on advisory boards, attended council meetings, and knew the right people to call. For the Colemans, aligning their son with Emily wasn't about romance. It was about survival. The wedding was a deal, a merger dressed in lace and roses. To both families, the marriage was a transaction. To Jason, it was an opportunity. To Emily, it was a leap of faith she prayed would free her from her past. On September 2nd, 2022, the Regal Oaks Hotel ballroom glowed with chandeliers and white roses. 300 guests gathered for what was called the wedding of the year. Emily walked down the aisle in a gown of lace that shimmered under the lights, her veil trailing behind her like a scene out of a dream. Jason stood at the altar, his smile steady, his hand firm as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Cameras flashed, guests applauded, and social media lit up with hashtags. Hashtag Coleman Wedding, hashtag Forever Starts Today. To the guests, it was a perfect beginning. To the families, it was a necessary transaction sealed in public spectacle. But to Jason, it was the staging ground for revenge. As the night carried on, the ballroom filled with laughter and music. Friends toasted the couple, Children danced under the chandeliers, and Emily's smile never wavered as she leaned against Jason's shoulder. But behind Jason's steady expression was a storm. Every cheer, every photo, every congratulation was, to him, part of the play. He wasn't celebrating. He was waiting. Waiting for the music to stop, for the guests to leave, for the door of the honeymoon suite to shut. Because that was when the real wedding would begin, not with love, not with tenderness, but with judgment. The reception had ended just past 2 a.m. The guests had drifted away, the ballroom was quiet, and the last clinking of glasses faded into silence. For the newlyweds, it should have been the beginning of a lifetime together. Instead, it was the beginning of the end. Jason and Emily Coleman stepped into the honeymoon suite of the Regal Oaks Hotel, a room carefully staged by the staff, rose petals scattered across the bed, a bottle of champagne on ice, soft music humming faintly from the radio by the window. But the romance of the scene lasted only minutes. As the door closed, Jason's demeanor shifted. His smile dropped. His eyes hardened. He walked across the room to his bag, reached inside, and pulled out a folder so thick it could barely stay closed. He laid it on the table between them with deliberate precision. The weight of it was louder than words. Emily's face fell. She asked what it was, her voice catching with unease. Jason didn't answer at first. He opened the folder slowly, pulling out page after page, printed emails, grainy photographs, typed transcripts. His voice was low, controlled, each word measured. "Do you want to explain this to me, or should I go through it for you?" Emily's breath caught as she recognized her own words, her own photographs from years ago. It was her affair, resurrected and printed in black and white. She tried to explain. It was the past, a mistake she regretted, a period of weakness that meant nothing now. She told him it had ended long before they had even met. But Jason wasn't listening. His hands shook with fury as he accused her of deceiving him, humiliating him, and dragging shame onto his family. The confrontation escalated quickly. Emily, instead of collapsing under the weight of guilt, found her voice. She stood her ground, her tears giving way to anger. She told him he had no right to judge her when he had built his own life on lies. She revealed what she had discovered in the weeks before the wedding: irregularities in his company's finances, debts hidden under layers of false contracts, whispered rumors about fraudulent deals connected to his father's construction firm. Her voice rose as she reminded him that his empire was not built on honor, but on deceit. For the first time, Jason's composure cracked. The man who had planned this moment as his stage for control was now exposed. He had wanted to strip Emily of dignity, but she was stripping him of his mask. The fight exploded. Jason shouted, Emily shouted back. A champagne glass shattered against the wall. Neighbors later reported hearing heavy thuds, the sound of furniture slamming against the floor, and muffled screams. Emily fought back with everything she had: her arms, her fists, even her nails. She was not passive. She clawed at Jason, leaving deep scratches across his face and neck. She grabbed the bedside lamp and swung it, the bulb bursting in sparks. The room became a war zone, two lives colliding with years of secrets and unspoken pain. At 3:15 a.m., the front desk received the first complaint of noise from the honeymoon floor. By 3:25, security was dispatched to the room. They knocked, but there was no answer. The screams had gone silent. When they forced the door open at 3:27 a.m., the scene froze them in place. Emily lay across the bed, her white gown ripped, her veil twisted in her hair, bruises across her arms and face, blood staining the sheets. Her chest no longer rose with breath. Jason sat slumped against the wall, his shirt torn, his knuckles bloodied, his face streaked with scratches. He muttered to himself, rocking back and forth, repeating the same words. She betrayed me. She betrayed me. Police arrived within minutes. Jason was handcuffed without resistance. Officers noted his detached state, his refusal to make eye contact, his lips moving as if reciting a prayer or curse only he could hear. Emily was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner would later confirm blunt force trauma to the head and chest, as well as multiple defensive wounds. The honeymoon suite, once adorned for celebration, had become a crime scene. Detectives began the investigation immediately. They photographed the room from every angle. They collected the scattered papers from Jason's folder, Emily's smashed phone, and the broken champagne flute. They noticed blood beneath Emily's fingernails, later matched to Jason's DNA. They cataloged the bruises on her arms, consistent with her trying to shield herself from blows. The timeline began to take shape. Witnesses confirmed the shouting, the breaking glass, the abrupt silence. But what puzzled investigators was how Jason had obtained the evidence of Emily's affair. Within days, forensic analysts traced the anonymous blackmail emails sent to Emily before the wedding. The IP addresses linked back to burner accounts created on Jason's devices. His search history revealed late-night questions: how to recover deleted emails, how to print messages without headers, how to make an attack appear like self-defense. It was enough to shift the case from a crime of passion to a calculated act. Jason's statements shifted under interrogation. At first, he claimed he discovered the affair on the wedding night, and that he lost control in a moment of rage. Then he claimed Emily had provoked him by accusing him of fraud, and that she attacked him first. But the evidence contradicted him at every turn. Detectives pressed harder, presenting the emails, the burner accounts, the testimony of ex-girlfriends who had described his controlling nature. What emerged was a portrait of a man who had been planning this confrontation long before the vows were spoken. By the time the trial opened in March 2023, Greenwood was divided. Some clung to the image of Jason as a respected son of the community, a man provoked into tragedy. Others saw him as a manipulator who staged a marriage to exact revenge. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Jason entered in a tailored suit, hair combed neatly, trying to project the same polished image he had always shown. Emily's family sat together in grief, clutching framed photographs of her in her choir gown, her teaching awards, her beaming smile from before all of this. The prosecution presented a chilling narrative. They showed the jury Jason's internet searches, his burner accounts, the printed folder he carried into the suite. They played audio from neighbors who had recorded screams through the walls on their phones. They called witnesses, ex-girlfriends who described Jason's controlling behaviors, teachers who remembered his obsession with perfection, even family friends who recalled his intolerance for being crossed. The story they told was of a man who orchestrated his wedding as a trap, not as a promise. The defense countered with passion. They painted Jason as a man pushed to the edge, humiliated on the night meant to be his greatest triumph. They argued that Emily's confession about his fraudulent business, combined with the revelation of her affair, triggered a storm of emotions no man could control. They called it provocation, a momentary break in reason. They pleaded with the jury to see him as a man, not a monster. The most explosive moment came when Dr. Lionel Barrett was called to the stand. Under oath, he admitted to the affair with Emily. His voice was steady but hollow as he described their relationship, confirming it had been wrong, confirming she had been young, confirming that he had crossed every boundary of trust. The courtroom erupted. Emily's name, tarnished in whispers for months, was suddenly vindicated. She had not been a manipulator. She had been manipulated. The affair that Jason used as justification for rage was reframed as evidence of Emily's vulnerability. But the trial did not stop at their personal lives. It dug into the families themselves. The Richardsons' financial records were laid bare, showing years of failed real estate ventures, debts hidden under new loans, desperation disguised as stability. The Colemans' business accounts revealed fraudulent billing, manipulated contracts, and political maneuvering that tied directly to Harold Richardson's connections. What had been celebrated as a perfect union was unmasked as a desperate deal, two families sacrificing their children's happiness for power and survival. The trial dragged on for weeks. Witnesses recounted the ballroom's joy, only to end with the horror of the honeymoon suite. Jurors listened to experts describe the bruises on Emily's body, the scratches on Jason's skin, the deliberate planning evidenced in his searches and accounts. Each day layered new details onto a story already heavy with betrayal. By April, the jury reached its decision. Guilty of second-degree murder. Jason Coleman was sentenced to life in prison. The Richardsons left the courtroom shattered, their debts now exposed to the world. The Colemans' business collapsed under scandal, contracts pulled, credibility destroyed. Greenwood was left scarred, its most extravagant wedding remembered forever as its darkest crime scene. And yet, from the ashes, a voice rose. Emily's 19-year-old cousin Naomi, devastated by the loss, launched a movement called Speak True. What began as a small campaign in Greenwood grew into a national movement for honesty in relationships and protections against coercive control. Her cousin's story, once confined to hushed whispers in a courtroom, became a rallying cry on college campuses, on social media, on talk shows. Emily's name, once tied to tragedy, became tied to change. But the story of that wedding night, of the suite on the 14th floor, and of the lives destroyed within it, still forces one question. Was Jason Coleman a man undone by betrayal, or a predator who staged the perfect trap? And more importantly, why did no one stop it before it was too late? April 14th, 2023. Greenwood's courthouse was filled beyond capacity. People had lined up at dawn to claim a seat inside, while others gathered outside the old brick building just to catch fragments of news as the trial neared its end. The jury had been out for 11 hours. Families huddled together, reporters murmured into their microphones, and across town televisions glowed in diners and living rooms, everyone waiting for the same words. At 4:07 p.m., the jury returned. The air in the courtroom thickened as 12 men and women filed back to their seats, each one carrying the burden of weeks of testimony, photographs, and evidence. The foreperson stood, hands trembling slightly as the paper was unfolded. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Coleman, guilty of murder in the second degree. The words echoed against the walls. Emily's mother cried out, clutching her daughter's photograph to her chest, her shoulders shaking as her husband wrapped his arms around her. The sound of grief mixed with relief rippled through her family's row. Across the aisle, Jason's mother let out a wail, a guttural cry that broke the silence. She collapsed against her husband, Victor, who sat staring blankly ahead, his face drained of color. Jason didn't move. He remained upright, his expression still, as though carved into stone. His attorneys whispered to him, but he gave no response. The judge's voice followed, solemn and steady, life in prison. No possibility of parole. A man who had once been Greenwood's shining sun was led away in chains, his polished image forever destroyed. The aftermath spread like a shockwave. The Coleman business collapsed almost overnight. The city rescinded contracts, banks called in debts, and suppliers cut ties. Victor Coleman, once a respected contractor, was left bankrupt. Lorraine disappeared from public life, refusing interviews, refusing even to step foot in church, where once she had led Bible studies. Their name, once a symbol of pride, had become a warning. For the Richardsons, the truth was just as crushing. The trial had exposed Harold's debts, his failed real estate ventures, his reliance on Jason's marriage to stabilize his finances. His reputation was shattered, his political ties dissolved. The family that had once held a place of honor in Greenwood found themselves whispered about in grocery store aisles, their tragedy recounted in hushed tones. Denise Richardson rarely left her home. Even the familiar streets of town felt hostile. Greenwood itself carried the scars. The Regal Oaks Hotel permanently closed the suite where Emily had died, its door locked, its number removed. But people knew. They avoided that floor. Some swore they could still hear faint echoes of the screams. The wedding that had once filled the town with pride had become a legend of shame, told in fragments to visitors, remembered with unease whenever someone spoke of loyalty, marriage, or trust. The photographs from that night, Emily in her gown, Jason at her side, still floated online, haunting reminders of how quickly beauty could curdle into horror. But amid the devastation, something unexpected began to grow. 19-year-old Naomi Richardson, Emily's younger cousin, refused to let her story end in silence. Naomi was shy, almost timid in her early days of speaking out, but grief had given her voice strength. She began online, creating a page she called Speak True. At first it was just a place to share memories of Emily, but soon it became something larger. Survivors of coercive control, of manipulation disguised as love, began writing to her. They told their stories anonymously at first, then bravely under their own names. Naomi shared them, adding her own plea. That honesty should never be feared, that control disguised as devotion was not love, and that Emily's story should serve as a warning. The movement spread with startling speed. On college campuses, Speak True clubs formed, inviting Naomi to speak about the danger of red flags hidden beneath charm. Churches invited her to talk about truth in relationships, breaking centuries-old silences around emotional abuse. She stood before rooms of strangers, her voice trembling at first, then steady, telling them what had happened to Emily, reminding them that loyalty should never be demanded at the cost of freedom. Hashtags carrying Emily's name began to trend. Influencers spoke about Speak True, linking it to broader conversations about trust, about power, about the way love can be twisted into possession. Survivors began to use the hashtag to share their own stories. By the following year, Naomi had testified before lawmakers, urging recognition of coercive control as a form of abuse. She told them her cousin's story, not in sensational detail, but in the quiet, devastating way of someone who had lost family to silence. Her words struck, her movement grew, and slowly, Emily's life took on a meaning beyond tragedy. She became a symbol, not of betrayal or shame, but of resilience, a reminder that even in death, truth can echo louder than lies. Speak True became a national campaign, featured in news outlets, discussed on talk shows, spreading far beyond Greenwood, Mississippi. Still, the questions lingered. Was Jason Coleman a man pushed beyond his limits, broken by humiliation, or was he a predator who had staged every step with precision, knowing how it would end? Should a mistake made in youth define someone's future? Or was Emily punished not for her past, but for daring to move on from it? Did the family's desperation for power and money blind them to the storm they were forcing their children into? And if love had been allowed to be honest, if reputation had mattered less than compassion, could Emily have been saved? These questions are not easy. They linger in the mind long after the story ends. And that is why you cannot treat this story as just another headline. You have listened this far. You have walked through the ballroom, the suite, the courtroom, and now you carry this with you. The only question left is whether you will stay silent, or whether you will help make sure Emily's voice continues to be heard. Hit subscribe right now, because if you don't, you are no different from the guests who clapped for the first dance, smiled for the photographs, and went home while Emily's screams went unanswered just floors above. If you walk away now, her story vanishes again, buried under the endless churn of news and distraction. If you refuse to subscribe, then go into the comments and explain why you think her life isn't worth remembering, why her voice should fade. But if you believe silence has protected abusers for too long, if you believe loyalty should never be weaponized, if you believe Emily deserved better, then subscribe now. Stand with her. Stand with Naomi. Stand with every woman silenced by control masquerading as love. Don't look away. Don't be the guest who left while the music still played. Be the voice that answers the silence. Subscribe, and make sure Emily Richardson is never forgotten.